Moving on now to the conflict between Israel and Hamas. There's some hope that a deal to release some of the hostages held by the terror group since the 7th of October could be imminent in exchange for a temporary pause in the fighting. Well, joining us now live from Tel Aviv is Eylon Levy, spokesman for the Israeli government. Mr. Levy, President Biden says we might be close to a deal on hostages. Is that the case?
You'll appreciate that I can't comment on sensitive negotiations when human lives hang in the balance. I think the less we say, the better. But if Israeli society is, of course, sick with worry for the fate of those 240 hostages, there's a 10-month-old baby who is now waking up for the 46th day in Hamas captivity. There's a 3-year-old girl who was orphaned when Hamas murdered her father in front of her eyes. And she's been terrified for 46 days now in those tunnels. And we're doing everything we can to bring them home because their abduction is simply an inexcusable, unforgivable war crime.
Alan, I really appreciate you being with us again. Very much appreciate that this is an ongoing and fluid situation. Take your comments about what's going on right now. The problem with a 5-day pause, the problem with a ceasefire, the problem with anything to do with this, and of course the optics, the babies, the hostages. We saw that guy Hans, his daughter, the 8-year-old, horrible interview yesterday saying, every day I fear she's in a tunnel saying, where's my daddy?
Yeah, really heartbreaking.
I guess both sides, sadly, will want something for a pause. I was brought up to believe that you don't negotiate with terrorists. So if you don't negotiate with terrorists, how the hell are we going to get these poor hostages out?
Well, we're demanding the immediate, unconditional and safe return of those 240 hostages, but they are being held by a brutal terrorist organization that on October 7th burned, butchered, tortured, beheaded and raped their way through these people's communities. They're holding them. We need to get them out. And our strategy right now is to continue to put unrelenting pressure, military pressure and diplomatic pressure on Hamas to release those hostages. This war will end with the total destruction of Hamas. It's the only way that this war can end in response to the October 7th massacre and Hamas's promises to continue committing as many massacres as it takes to destroy our country. But a temporary pause in order to get those hostages out, a massive release of hostages, that is, of course, something that we will consider because we want to get these people, and especially these children, safe back to their families. Those who still have families, whose families weren't murdered, that is.
Eylon, where does this end? There's over 13,000 people now who have been killed within Gaza. We've seen the bombing of hospitals. We've seen the bombing of refugee camps. Of course, the IDF, Israeli government saying that, well, you know, Hamas are using these structures to protect themselves. But from your position, you're an Israeli government spokesperson. There must have been conversations about the death toll in Gaza and just how many innocent women, children, men have been killed at the hands of Israel.
This war ends with the total destruction of Hamas and the return of our hostages. We're not going back to 6 a.m. on October 7th in a world that Hamas can invade at will and perpetrate the atrocities like it did on October 7th. Now, as for the civilian casualties, look, of course, every civilian life lost is tragic. That happens in war. This isn't a war that we started, we wanted, or even expected. This is a war that Hamas declared on us. It's a war that we're trying to win, and it's a war that we're trying to end, and trying to end it in a way that makes sure that Hamas can't drag us back into another round of fighting. Now, I'll comment on those casualty numbers that you are presenting. Those are the numbers presented by Hamas. Those are the numbers that are being... We know that we have killed thousands of terrorists, and we know that those numbers are presented by the terrorists who burned, beheaded, and abducted babies on October 7th.
You have an intelligence department.
I'm trying to explain.
It's simply a number, Eylon. You can just give me a number.
We know that we have killed thousands of terrorists, and we know that we have made every measure to try to get civilians out of harm's way, while Hamas is trying to maximize civilian casualties on its own side, because its whole strategy is based on human shields.
So the answer is you don't have a number.
We know that we are doing every effort to try to minimize civilian casualties.
Can I just quickly ask you, moving away from Gaza and up towards the West Bank now, you spoke earlier of war crimes. What about the war crimes that have been Israel has been accused of committing when it comes to shooting innocent civilians at the West Bank?
Well, the war crimes that I can comment on are the attempts by Palestinian terrorists in the West Bank to escalate attacks over there. Just the other day, we killed 3 terrorists at a checkpoint on their way to perpetrate an attack in Jerusalem.
You've also killed innocent people at those checkpoints, Eylon. I just want an honest answer about that.
any innocent people who are caught in the crossfire, that is, of course, a horrific tragedy.
It's not crossfire. There was a disabled man who was shot for simply throwing stones towards Israel, who was about 100 metres away from them. And there was a man that Israel took a photograph of saying that they were helping him across the border. And minutes later, he was found shot dead.
I'm not familiar with these reports.
OK.
Of course, we are in the West Bank trying to contain a situation where Hamas is trying to escalate that conflict. Hamas is trying to drag the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen into this conflict, and we're focusing on destroying the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre and not giving those terrorists an opportunity to escalate the conflict and hurt more innocent people.
Eylon, can I just ask you a question? And I appreciate you being on. We've heard a lot about hostages, and quite rightly, those 240 coming home. How far, I started this by saying one shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. Will you make any concessions to get those terrorists home? Will you make...
Hostages.
Hostages, sorry. Will you... Thank you so much, yeah. Will you make any concessions because of how important it is to reunite those families? I absolutely support your right to go to war. I don't like what I see, but I understand war is war, and I understand where Nick's coming from. But will Israel give ground to these terrorists to get the hostages back, or are we going to be at this standoff for as long as it takes?
As I said, these are sensitive negotiations, and human lives, children's lives hang in the balance. And I think the less I say on Talk TV, the better. All
right, my friend. Well, listen, always good. I hope you understand. We have to look at all sides from this and challenge people and try and deliver people who, we know this, are just getting information from newspapers and online, and we want to try and get all sides and get the truth. Eylon Levy, thank you so much indeed.
Very important.
Still to come on